Church of the Covenant, I invite you to pray with me. God, we thank you for this sacred time set aside in our week where we gather with one another, and yet we really have one job to do, and that is listening to you. Listening to you in the quiet, listening to you in the stories, listening to you in the relationships, listening to your voice of love. We thank you for that voice. Amen. This passage that we just heard, read so beautifully by Trudy, is a passage from Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, Greece. And this is a passage that I imagine is quite a familiar one to many of us. I know for me, it really evokes weddings. Weddings, especially I think of them in my 20s, where I was going to weddings every few weeks. And this feeling of comfort is one that I feel when I hear this particular passage. A familiar passage, a comforting passage. Love is patient. Love is kind. And in my world, and perhaps for many of us, this is a passage of happy occasions. This is a passage of unity and connection, of wedding ceremonies. It tends to make me kind of think, hooray for love, hooray for unity, hooray for this beautiful occasion. And that's true, sort of, but I think we can grow to appreciate this particular passage in even new ways, expanded ways, when diving into the historical context in which it was written, which, as often is the case, opens up a whole new world of possibilities, and ones that even might be transformative. A bit more transformative, I think, than maybe the simplistic hooray, hooray kind of message that I have tended to associate this passage with. So let's dive in. I've read quite a bit from Boston University's own Dr. Shively T.J. Smith. She is a scholar of New Testament studies, and it occurs to me at Covenant, maybe a colleague or a professor of some. And she writes that it's curious to her that this particular passage has become kind of a slogan for marriage, when in reality, Paul wrote this book, 1 Corinthians, to quite the opposite situation. In this passage, Paul declares love as the greatest power to a body of people, a country, a community that seems to be lacking a lot of it. This moment is actually a far cry from an adoring couple standing at an altar, declaring unwavering devotion to one another. The members of the Corinthian church, to whom chapter 13 is directed, are nowhere near a love fest, Dr. Smith writes. Dr. Smith goes on to tell us, and I quote, that the Corinthians, they were not a homogeneous body. Its members were not all of the same kind and ilk. This was not a comfortable gathering where people fell into step with each other because they shared fundamentally similar lives or values or experiences, but rather quite the contrary. This Corinthian fellowship transgressed conventional social boundaries of ethnicity, of gender, age, rank, life situation. And, unfortunately, this diversity had dissolved into discord and rivalry. Members divided into contentious groups. They took sides with some saying they are of one teacher or they are of another teacher. This was a community that was fragmented rather than enriched by difference. Paul's poetic ode to love that we know today was not written to celebrate the unifying love already accomplished. Instead, it was a call to action. It was not a tribute to what is, it was an intervention to instruct on what had yet come to pass. No, it was not a tribute to what is, but rather an intervention to instruct on what had yet come to pass. So to a situation of discord and strife, to this body where there is brokenness, it is this passage about love undergirding all else that Paul comes in with. And this love that Paul speaks to has some very strong characteristics that Paul has come to know. Paul has come to know love as something kind, love as something patient, love as something that endures all things, that never, ever leaves. And perhaps even more notably, Paul tells us quite a bit about what love is not. It is not boastful. It is not arrogant. It doesn't insist on its own way, but rather, as I hear it, it sounds like something a bit quieter, enduring, maybe easy to miss because it doesn't insist or boast or get antsy. It endures with a quiet persistence through it all, traveling right alongside us wherever we go, quietly, strongly, without judgment, and ready for us whenever we are ready for it. When I think about this love, it almost becomes like a character here. It's this active agent in the world that contains these mysterious and amazing and admirable qualities that Paul has come to know. Here, love is an agent. Love is a voice. Love is active. Love has a lot to offer. If the community in Corinth can get to know this entity, love, really get to know this love, and welcome it in, they may find their way through disconnect and pain that seems to be running rampant. Sounds great, but obviously this is not an easy thing to do, and here in 2024, we haven't figured it out either. The context in the community in Corinth points to an active love, this love that provides wisdom and kindness and patience in an enduring and never-ending way. And we see its potential in the disconnect between groups and individuals, between sides, between ideologies, between different experiences. In this context, love is something that creates a transformation out there, it seems. It's something that is out on the loose, out in our world, out in our attempts at healing and reconciliation between bodies. But for today, and for many of us perhaps, I want to particularly note that this patient and kind love that Paul speaks of, it's not something that's only out there. And perhaps it really isn't out there at all. It is not only something that happens between people, between bodies, but rather something that flows out of us, something that is within each of us and for each of us. There is a source within each of us that we can call love, a source that is patient, a source that is kind, a source that will endure anything for us and with us, a source that is not boastful or arrogant, but strong and quiet, unconditional and full of wisdom beyond our own human knowing. Paul might call this love. We might call this God. God is this love. God is this love. And so, not thinking about the many external conflicts and divisions and strife that exist between any collection of us human beings, but instead turning inward to our individual selves, I wonder, do we have, within each of ourselves, within each of our individual bodies, any discord, any brokenness, any judgmental or harmful voice that may also need this healing voice of love? Is there within each of our own bodies some of that brokenness of the community of Corinth? In each of our own ways, at least for me, I think many of us can relate to Corinth. We may individually, personally know what it's like to not always feel fully whole, to not feel fully unified within, to not feel full and integrated and at full peace. We may each of us be that body of Corinth, a body at times experiencing discord, division. And to any of us, we may need that reminder that Paul gave Corinth so many years ago. The reminder that love has never gone away because love endures all things. Love is present within you, within me right now, waiting to be heard, waiting to speak, waiting for us to listen. Love, patient yet strong, wise yet not boastful, enduring all things with us, enduring all things for us. But there is a persistent question within me that asks, but how do I know when something is love's voice? In any given situation, in any given prayer that I lift to God, and the responses I may note within myself, I often have to wonder, is that the voice of love? Is that the voice of fear? Is that the voice of past traumas or the voice of oppressive systems that still live within me? Love, God, what is your voice? What do you sound like? What do you feel like when you are speaking within me? Well, an overly simplified yet answer with some truth might be that if you want to hear love speak, just ask love to speak. Fittingly, I've recently become quite captivated this year by a project that's called Letters from Love. This is a project from the author Elizabeth Gilbert. She's most famously known as the author of Eat, Pray, Love, amongst many other books. But this latest project is not a book that she's writing, but rather she's introducing readers to her own daily spiritual practice. And this spiritual practice is literally writing what she calls a letter from love. Every day, for over 25 years, Gilbert tells us that she's gotten up each morning, and before doing anything else, she has written herself a letter from some voice within herself that she has come to call love. A letter from that voice of unconditional love within her that once she learned how to ask and how to listen, apparently has a lot to say. She has a ritual where at the top of the page, she writes, "Dear love, what would you have me know today? Dear love, what would you have me know today?" And from there, without fail, a response. A letter in return pours out from within her. A letter written from her own deep place of unconditional love. A letter from love, a letter from God. About this process, Gilbert writes that, "I believe there is an ocean of warm, affectionate, and outrageously unconditional love available to us all. And conveniently, it's accessed from within. I don't believe anyone is excluded from this ocean of love," she writes. "It's only a question of learning how to hear it, how to feel it, and how to trust it." I've gone down quite a rabbit hole about this project, reading tons of Gilbert's letters from love, and then reading the letters from love that others have written and posted around the internet. And then I've started writing a few of them myself. And indeed, Paul is right. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not boast. Love doesn't even insist on its own way. And something I love the most about it is love sounds exactly like each one of us. Love has no truer voice than your voice. Love has no truer voice than my voice. The love that pours out in my letters, it sounds just like my very best Julie. Love's voice is the kindest, wisest, most gentle, and most understandable, and most encouraging version of me. It doesn't seem to write with the beautiful eloquence of Elizabeth Gilbert, but it's playful and supportive, it's understanding, it uses the language and the euphemisms that are uniquely mine, and I am certain that love sounds exactly like you, too. Writing a letter from love and seeing what happens might work well for you. But I also know deeply that human beings across the millennia have had so many ways of listening for love. That is, I think, what prayer is all about anyway. Love may speak to you through the song that plays on repeat in your mind. Love may come through the strange and mysterious dream that you awake from and that you just can't shake. Love may come in the silence between the music that we hear today. Love will come. Love will speak. Love will always be there. But we just need to remember that it's there and know how to listen. But what happens when a body is broken? Paul writes about love to a body, this community in Corinth that is disconnected from itself, that is divided, a body that isn't feeling whole, a body that has been hurt. It is to this body that Paul delivers this word on love. Now, I don't know about you, but I think many of us human beings are walking around feeling that sense of incompleteness as the church in Corinth. Each of us in our own ways may experience disconnection from ourselves at times. Each of us may not always feel wholeness. Each of us has likely experienced woundedness, wounded by lies of white supremacy, wounded by lies of patriarchy or misogyny, lies of homophobia or fat phobia or transphobia, of pompous ego or of colonization. With all of that swirling around within us and outside us, the voice of love could not be more important, and yet likely is oh so difficult to hear. Disconnected and divided and wounded, and likely with some of those harmful messages masquerading as truth within us and around us as they may be, Paul is here to remind us that wholeness resides there too. And it's already there. It's already there. Love is whole, and that wholeness will never forsake us. But we need to listen to what it has to say. If wholeness already resides within each one of us, if love, if God, if absolute unconditional love and completeness abides within each of us already, then I don't know about you, but I feel a lot more hopeful for humanity. Because between each group where there's disconnect, between each clash of values, between relationships of brokenness that long for real freedom, wholeness must already be there too. Sounding exactly like our strongest, kindest, freest, fullest selves. Love is already here. Wholeness is already here. But are we ready to hear it? Amen.